Now, I'm no Apple guy, but I know a good iPhone when I see one, and I happen to know which iPhone is the best iPhone of all time without competition. I was prompted to make this video when I had to use the backup iPhone 5S right here, and I realized this phone is still so good after all these years have passed. And remember, all opinions on this channel are my own. They're the right opinion, but they're my own, so you're allowed to disagree. So here's some non-opinions before we get into the opinion section. The iPhone 5S was the first iPhone to feature a fingerprint sensor. You know, not the first phone, but the first iPhone. The first phone to have a fingerprint sensor was the Panasonic GI100, which came out in 2004. Other phones like the Toshiba G500 also had a fingerprint sensor, but neither of these phones were nearly as successful as Apple. Case in point, neither of these companies make phones anymore. So Apple wasn't the first to that, but they were the best to that. Apple's sensor was pretty fast and pretty secure, but the sensor was more than just an unlock your phone gimmick, even though it did make that less of a pain. Apple's Touch ID was integrated into all sorts of uses. The method was secure, meaning that, the fingerprint data was stored locally and safely on Apple's A7 processor, which we'll talk about in a moment, and not uploaded into the cloud or distributed into any apps, which is pretty cool if you ask me.
It's never available to other software, and it's never stored on Apple servers or backed up to iCloud.
Okay, so Apple's A7 processor is the more hidden part of the show here. Sure, it was fast and efficient, but most importantly, it was the first 64-bit processor in a smartphone.
I don't think the other guys are even talking about it yet.
It was, ahead of its time, except for the fact that Samsung made the processors. Oh, Samsung. Well, you know what they say. When Apple can't do it, Samsung can. They don't say that, but that's definitely an opinion of mine. And I will give Apple their credit though, because they did make an excellent 64-bit processor that was the first on any phone, even if, Samsung had to make it. It's got a 1560 milliamp hour battery and a gigabyte of RAM. Mine has 16 gigabytes of storage, but Apple did have 32 and 64 gigabyte variants as well. The iPhone has a 4-inch screen with a resolution of 640 by 1136, which is pretty tiny by today's standards. The screen itself is actually really clear and has really good colors, even compared to modern phones. I'm not sure how color accurate the screen is, but it does look like a modern phone screen, just, well, smaller. The iPhone 5S was the first iPhone to have slow motion recording set at 720p and 120 frames per second. But there is a rumor that the iPhone 5S's slow motion 720p wasn't actually 720p and was a bit lower. But who has the time to care? So the single rear and the single front cameras themselves are better than nothing, and they take decent pictures and video. Because of the virus, I didn't really go anywhere, but I could reliably get good pictures of the things I needed to take pictures of. So the iPhone 5S is recording in 1080p 30 frames per second, and I set my LG V40 to do the same, and I was pretty surprised at how the iPhone did. Its colors were more saturated and not as realistic compared to the V40 and how it actually looked, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the 5S's colors looked really good and it was a really good video quality. Unfortunately, when you compare the two with the LG V40 set at 4K 60 FPS, it's just not as good in terms of like the detail you get when doing a 5x zoom on the moving objects in the background. The iPhone 5S just isn't as good with that. But you compare these phones expecting a better result with the V40, which is why I was so surprised with the iPhone's good quality. What does make this phone a bit more interesting though is it was upgraded from iOS 7 all the way to iOS 12.4.9. There is no Android phone from 2013 that went nearly as far as the iPhone 5S. If you tell me one that was close, I'll probably review it. As of now, iPhones are on iOS 14, and I'm sure in a matter of time, the updates and app support for this phone will grind to a halt like it is with my iPad mini 1. It's hard to ignore how much of a legacy the iPhone 5S had, not only for Apple, but for the entire smartphone world. iPhone 5S changed how we unlock our phones forever. And without it, it might have been a while before a gold standard that wasn't Apple's was put in place for fingerprint scanners.
And it is the gold standard in smartphones.
It's too bad though that Apple will go on to ruin this legacy with Face ID. So I used this phone once again for over a week, and it was weird to go from a spec sheet monster like the LG V40 to a humble little iPhone. But it didn't feel like I was giving up modern technology to be there either. It still has iMessage though, and that's a huge plus. And it has a headphone jack. The iPhone 5S is superbly built. Even after all this time, the build quality still feels very premium and unique. The feel of the iPhone 5, 5S, and even if you go back to the iPhone 4, they all prove that thicker phones without rounded edges can feel premium too. It's no secret then why the iPhone 12 falls back on those squared edges. It's just too good. So I've chosen not to be too critical of this phone. Yeah, it's a little old and slow, its battery life is definitely not what it used to be, but it's like home to me. This was the phone that got me interested in phones. I remember when my dad brought it home and how badly I wanted one at the time. If you really like the design of the iPhone 5 or 5S, the iPhone SE is probably your best bet. I find it fitting that the first video I'm making as my return to the channel is about the first phone I ever found fascinating. It's still cool to me now, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. It is the best iPhone ever made after all. I got an 8-ball right here, Magic 8-ball, and it's going to tell me whether my opinion on the iPhone 5S is right or not. So let's do it. What's that supposed to mean? Alright, well, in that case, let me know in the comments below what iPhone you think is the best iPhone of all time. Unless your opinion is the iPhone 7, then kindly keep it to yourself. Alright, this is Isaac's Tech, and thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in seeing more interesting stuff in the tech world, please consider subscribing, and also feel free to click around the channel, see if there's anything else interesting to you, and have a great day.